Welcome to today's talk presented by the Law and Technology Centre at the University of Hong Kong, Law Faculty here. It gives me great pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Tony Lam. I'm Michael Jackson. I'm a teacher within the faculty. Tony's talk today is entitled Artificial Intelligence, Privacy and Ethics, and it's a very timely topic for discussion. Tony described himself to me as a generalist, but it is clear that if you've read his short CV on the notice, he has a wealth of experience, primarily in the public sector, and that includes time spent as a deputy commissioner within the office of Hong Kong's Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data. I understand the Privacy Commissioner has co-chaired a working group which has been exploring the question of privacy, ethics and AI for some time, and recently produced their own guidelines on the topic. It's also the case that numerous proposals and guidelines and draft regulatory frameworks have been issued by both governments and supranational institutions around the world recently. That includes a proposal earlier in this year in April by the European Union. Most recently, I believe the PRC has beat everyone to the gun by actually enacting a code, which is entitled the Ethical Norms for the New Generation of Artificial Intelligence, at least in translation. That's not its Chinese title as such. So this is a very timely topic. Happily, most of these draft proposals put humans at the front and center of the ethical standards they propose, the ethical frameworks, maintaining a human decision-making priority. Look forward to hearing what Tony has to offer about the topic today. I have indicated to him that he is free to remove his mask. I'll put mine on and will maintain social distancing for clarity purposes. I've also indicated that I hope we will have some time at the end for questions and answers if it's available. So if you do have any questions, please send them via the chat and we'll try to summarize them and get some answers later. Thank you. Tony.
Thank you, Michael. And good afternoon, everybody online. I'm very happy to have this chance to talk to you on this, I think, very important topic, artificial intelligence, privacy, and ethics. Perhaps let me start with a quote from the late Professor Stephen Hawking, who is perhaps the greatest scientist of our time. In his book, Brief Answers to the Big Questions. In this book, there is a chapter talking about AI. Will AI outsmart us? And therein, the late Professor Hawking has the following to say. You can see on the screen. Because of the great potential of AI, it is important to research how to reap its benefits while avoiding potential pitfalls. Success in creating AI would be the biggest event in human history. Unfortunately, it might also be the last, unless we learn how to avoid the risk. While primitive forms of AI developed so far have proved to be useful, I fear the consequences of creating something that can match or surpass humans. We do not know yet if AI may eventually surpass humans, but just like the process of technological advancement, we human beings, I believe, must manage the process. This is perhaps no different if audience might recall the time when motor cars replaced horse-drawn carriages as the mode of transport. At that time, we guided ourselves into a safe future through a whole host of concerted actions. We made rules essentially reckless driving. We have other rules on road use, speed limit, pedestrian crossing, etc. I guess we will need to do the same for the sea change to be brought to bear by AI. So what is AI? Let me borrow this definition, which I find very useful. A constellation of many different technologies working together to enable machines to sense, comprehend, act, and learn with human-like levels of intelligence. So AI therefore encompasses different technologies put together, and these technologies may include natural language processing, facial recognition, advanced data analytics, machine learning, deep learning, etc., to mimic human intelligence. What is important, I think, is that AI is not just one thing, because there's a constellation of different technologies working together. Neither is it just a thing, because it mimics human intelligence. And AI sucks in tremendous amount of data, including personal data. And data is the lifeblood of AI systems in order to make their predictive analysis or even automated decision. And so there would be inherently implication on the privacy of personal data and the uses of it. What would be the implication? AI is very good at creatively destructing old business models. I think all of us know about Airbnb and Uber. They put together demand and supply through platforms, through which both the service providers and users are able to see, and making use of idle resources to satisfy market demand. I think that is all what those people studying economics would like to have, bringing market demand and supply together almost seamlessly. And there are no bus or a car of these companies of their own, but they create arguably the largest networks of bus for visitors and the largest car fleet for commuters. And even criminal suspects might be caught. Audience may recall that back around April to June 2018, our famous singer Jackie Chan had a pop concert tour in the mainland. And there were 5 or 6 concerts altogether. And over those concerts, each having about 50,000 to 60,000 people per concert, a total of 5 suspects were identified in the concerts through the use of facial recognition technologies. And other examples include enabling fintech, smart manufacturing, smart transportation, and even disease monitoring, etc. So the use of AI is almost everywhere. But there are no adverse use of AI which warrants our attention. I believe that the Cambridge Analytica Saga, which was revealed by a whistleblower in March 2018, would be a watershed in our human history in protecting personal data privacy. It was precisely this Saga which vividly exposed to us, revealed to us, how personal data had been and could be abusively collected, analyzed, and then got targeted against themselves with political advertisement, luring them in an echo chamber way to affect their voices, their choices of votes, as if they were acting with their free will. But anyway, there are complicated investigations by the UK Data Protection Authority and also by a committee under the UK Parliament's House of Commons. And I just want to very briefly to capture what actually happened as reviewed by these investigations from the personal data perspective. What happened basically was that some 87 million Facebook users got their data harvested without their consent by the British consulting firm, Cambridge Analytica, and used for political advertising through a personality app called This Is Your Digital Life. But only about 270,000 people actually downloaded the apps. But how come there were so many people's data got scooped? There were 3 main reasons. First of all, the frames of friends' data were captured, even though you did not actually download the app. So the network was much widened. Accounts deactivated or deleted by users still had their contents accessible by third-party apps. And some apps were able to circumvent users' privacy setting or platform setting. So the very extensive collection of data came into being. And let me share with you another 2 recent examples connected with AI-powered systems. The first is Ask Jamie. You could see on the screen, this is a screen cap. You could see the face of Jamie. Jamie was actually a virtual assistant of the Singaporean government, helping citizens and businesses navigate online government services and improve service delivery through an AI-powered chatbot. The Ask Jamie chatbot had been implemented for some 70 government agency websites as a move to push forward the smart nation agenda of Singapore until it was temporarily suspended earlier this month. What happened? Here is the screenshot, which went viral in Singapore, leading to the suspension of the chatbot. The text might be too small for audience to read, and let me share this with you. An user asked, "My daughter tested COVID-19. What should I do?" And Jamie replied with the following: "You should practice safe sex through the correct and consistent use of condoms, blah, 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 etc." And the Ministry of Health characterizes as misaligned replies and announced suspension of the chatbot on the 5th of October. As of yesterday, the chatbot was not yet back on Ministry of Health's website, although it has already been back on some other agency's website. And another recent example, which I would like to share with you. This is concerns a social media giant, again, Facebook. BBC reported early last month in September that when Facebook users watched a news video featuring Black men, the AI-powered recommendation system asked the viewers if they wanted to keep seeing videos about primates. And this is very unfortunate, demoralizing, and insulting. The social media giant apologized, disabled the system, and undertook to investigate. I have to add that such unpleasant surprises, which somehow reflected bias or discrimination in reality, perhaps haven't been entrenched through self-learning algorithms. And these things were not new. Audience may recall that back in 2015, 6 years ago, the photo app of another tech giant, Google, labeled picture of Black people as gorillas. So what will an AI-driven future hold for us? As said earlier, AI succeeds significant amount of data, including personal data. And from a data protection perspective, the risks of AI would include excessive collection and retention of data, lack of transparency, unpredictable use, bias and discrimination, as well as possible re-identification. And whether the predictive analysis or automated decisions turned out by AI system are correct, they depend a lot on the data sets, the training and testing of the algorithms. And that effectively means that an AI engineered analysis or decision may have a probability of 0 to 1 to be correct. As such, AI has a potential of changing something probabilistic to something deterministic if we humans take the AI automated recommendations or decisions as given. So to avoid harming the rights and interests of individuals arising from the development and use of AI systems, we need an approach to guide the process. What approach would be needed? Data protection laws help protect personal data privacy, making use of the usual rules of data minimization, purpose specification, use limitation, etc. But the AI and its impact goes beyond that. And laws are always lagging behind the development of technologies. And to avoid the development and use of AI going too far as to harming the interests of individuals, an ethical approach in data management, as well as the development and use of AI is badly needed. This is, in fact, I believe, in synchronization with our world currently moving into a value-based, people-centric modality. You can feel it very vividly if you look around and see how much emphasis and efforts, for instance, the business sector has been putting in areas like corporate social responsibility, creating shared values among stakeholders, but not merely stakeholders, and climate change actions, ESG, so on and so forth. So profit is not and cannot be the only driver of your business endeavor. And another 2P, I believe, people and the planet must come to the fore. And in one single word, humanity is the key. And as what the father of the nation of India, Gandhi, has once said, science without humanity is one of the 7 deadly sins of humans. An ethical approach in AI is required, and data ethics is thus brought in, though it does not replace data protection laws. So what is data ethics? The Office of the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data in Hong Kong was quite a pioneer in this subject in the region. 3 years ago, the office published a report titled Ethical Accountability Framework for Hong Kong, China. It advocated 3 values in data stewardship: being respectful, fair, and beneficial. And with these objectives and with these adjectives and very lofty goals, how actually can data ethics be implemented? And what does it mean by being respectful, fair, and beneficial? At a very practical level, we can say that to be respectful to your data subjects, to the individuals, a data user or a data controller provides genuine choices, no bundled choices, provide clear and easy to understand personal information collection statement. Being fair means having no bias, no discrimination. Being beneficial means creating benefits, not just only for yourselves, but also for the individuals and society as a whole. So in a more macro perspective, I would like to kind of summarize the main points of that report 3 years ago. Primarily, there is a 3-point strategy. First of all, multi-stakeholders approach. Look at the interests and the benefits, not just of yourself. Try to look beyond yourself, to look after the data subjects, your customers, the individuals. We need to have an inclusive strategy. Number 2, put personal data management within and not as an aftermath of business models. Put personal data management alongside the considerations of business processes, functionality, performance, efficiency, user-friendliness, etc. in an institutionalized end-to-end, from cradle to grave basis. And only if you put personal data management in an end-to-end cycle could you actually look after personal data from the point of collection through use, transfer, up to the point of erasure or destruction. And the 3rd point is it would be necessary to raise the sophistication of this cycle through regular review, try to plug whatever loopholes you discover, try to make any improvement after your review. And how then should we flesh out data ethics values, i.e. being respectful, being fair, and being beneficial to stakeholders in the context of the development and using AI? Let's look around and see what others are advocating. There are international guidelines advocating good governance in the development and use of AI. One example is the Global Privacy Assembly, GPA. As Michael has mentioned at the opening, Hong Kong was one of the co-chair of a working group on the accountability in the development and use of AI. And last year in October, the GPA adopted a resolution on this subject. It advocated 12 accountability principles, as what I have summarized on the screen. Let us go through it very briefly. Assess the potential impact on human rights, including data protection and privacy rights before development and use of AI. Test robustness, meaning testing reliability, accuracy, and data security of AI before putting into use. Keep records, for example, records of impact assessment, design, testing result. Disclose impact assessment results, for example, assessment of data protection. Whenever things go wrong, and then you can trace back. Ensure transparency and openness on the use of AI. For example, that by disclosing the use of AI, the data being used and the logic involved in the AI. Ensure an accountable human actor available for raising concerns. In order to trigger evaluation, if the data subjects are grieved of the decision made by automated AI, and someone would look after and look into the case. Provide explanation. Explanation has to be in clear and layman understandable language. Make human intervention on AI automated decisions. And after putting to use, you still have to continuously monitor and evaluate the performance and impacts of AI. implement whistleblowing or reporting mechanism so that non-compliance or significant risk in the use of AI could be reported. Ensure auditability. Be prepared to demonstrate your accountability upon request by data protection authorities, and engage in multi-stakeholders discussion to identify and address the wider socio-economic impacts of AI. These 12 principles are very much human-centric and make human accountable to the development and use of AI. And it represents an end-to-end process of monitoring and gauging the impact of the AI. And what about other regions? Some guidelines are at the regional level. For instance, the EU has an ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI issued in April 2019. And as Michael has mentioned, EU has proposed an AI Act in April this year. And there were 7 requirements in that particular guidelines, and the terminologies are different. You could say human agency and oversight, technical robustness and safety, privacy and data governance, transparency, diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, societal and environmental well-being, accountability. But the nature and the substance and the content of it are very similar to what has been advocated by GPA's resolution. And let's look closer in our region, Singapore. Singapore issued in January last year its 2nd edition of Model AI Governance Framework, advocating 2 guiding principles and 4 aspects to translate the principles into practice. The 2 guiding principles, as you could see from the screen, being decisions made by AI being explainable, transparent, and fair, AI systems being human-centric, and 4 aspects. They are more operational, trying to translate the principles into workable execution practices. They cover internal governance and structure, determining the level of human involvement in AI-augmented decision-making, operations arrangements such as minimizing bias and taking a risk-based approach, and stakeholder interaction and communication. So what about the mainland? The Ministry of Science and Technology had its expert committee set up in early 2019, and in June 2019, they issued a set of governance principles for new generation of AI in order to develop responsible AI. And that 8 principle, as you could see on the screen, the terminology are again different, especially when they're expressed in the Chinese language, but the substance of it is basically on ethics. And as Michael also mentioned, last month on the 25th of September, the expert committee of the Ministry of Science and Technology issued the ethical guidelines, and that particular guide has 26 articles altogether, and it seeks to embed ethics into the life cycle of development and use of AI from the perspectives of management, research, development, and use. And so what about the situation of Hong Kong? The Office of the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data issued guidance 2 months ago in August. And this particular document available on the internet on PCPD's website is built upon the 3 data ethics values to give principal guidance on the development and use of AI. The guidelines adopts a 7+4 structure, 7 ethical principles, similar to others like GPA's and EU's guidelines, and they include accountability, meaning organizations should be responsible and should be able to provide sound justifications for its actions. Human oversights, the level of human involvement should be proportionate to the risks and impact of AI. Transparency and interpretability, organizations should disclose the use of AI and relevant policies and strive to improve the interpretability of automated decisions. Data privacy, Organizations should put effective data governance in place to protect personal data privacy. Fairness. Organizations should avoid bias and discrimination in the use of AI. Beneficial AI. Organizations should avoid bias. Organizations should provide benefits and minimize harm to stakeholders. And reliability, robustness, and security. AI systems should operate reliably, be resilient to errors, and be protected against attack. And apart from these 7 principles, the guidance also provides a practice guide which covers 4 areas to facilitate execution. The 4 areas are AI strategy and governance, conduct risk assessment and human oversight, development of AI models and management of overall AI systems, and to foster communication and engagement with stakeholders. And in the practice guide, there is a very useful 4-page self-assessment checklist to elaborate what parameters you could examine or check in order to see whether or not you have suitably implemented those 4 areas. And what you can see on the screen are just a photo cap of those 2 of the 4 pages. And under each and every heading, AI strategy and governance, risk assessment and human oversight, development of AI models and management of AI systems, as well as communication and engagement with stakeholders, the PCBD set out some very useful questions which you could go through. I just go through it very briefly. For instance, for AI strategy and governance, you check whether or not you have formulated a strategy, whether you have set out internal policies and procedures, whether or not you have a governance committee to oversee the whole life cycle of development or use of AI. And in terms of the risk assessment and human oversight, you double check whether or not you have conducted a risk assessment exercise, whether or not personal data privacy aspect has been looked after. And so you could go through them one by one. And I would also like to highlight that in some data protection laws, they have provisions pertaining to advanced data analytics, which are particularly relevant to govern the development and use of AI, I think. For example, in GDPR Article 13, subsection 2F, there is a provision concerning the right to be informed of the existence of automated decision-making, including profiling and meaningful information about the logic involved, so that the impacted individuals at least have an opportunity to know that what impacted them result from automated decision-making and the logic involved. Another example, the right not to be subject to decision based solely on automated processing, including profiling, which produces legal effects concerning the individuals or similarly significantly affect him. This is existent in GDPR, and it is also existent in the Personal Information Protection Law recently passed by the mainland, and which will come into effect on the 1st of November. The two are similar. The third, which you could see on the screen, is from the mainland's Personal Information Protection Law concerning when automated decision-making is used for push notification and marketing, individuals shall be provided with an option for not receiving personalized information or convenient opt-out channels. I think this is quite innovative because when you got those personalized marketing messages, this basically obliged the data controllers who conduct the marketing to provide option that you not to receive those personalized information, or at least provide convenient opt-out channel. A further example is could be found from the UK Data Protection Act. There is a provision in section 171 stating that it is an offense for a person knowingly or recklessly to re-identify information that is de-identified personal data. So it tried to tackle the risks of possible re-identification. I think it is food for thought if data users in Hong Kong should adopt these measures as their own administrative or good practices, although our own personal data privacy ordinance do not have similar requirements. Let me share with you a recent enforcement case in Italy, making use of certain provisions of the GDPR on an AI-related case. Recently, the Italian data protection regulator imposed fines on two major online food delivery firms. One was fined euro 2.6 million, and another one fined 2.5 million euro for the discriminatory AI algorithm. The companies in question deliver, by way of digital platforms, food or other goods supplied by retailers following orders placed by customers. To that end, the companies rely on dedicated delivery staff, or what they call riders. And the companies use algorithm for monitoring and assessing delivery workers' performance, as well as assigning orders. For instance, the rating system relies on the application of a mathematical formula carrying penalties for those riders who do not accept orders promptly or reject such orders. They also track the journey of the riders, capturing data on how much time you spend on each segment of your journey. But sometimes the algorithm could not catch some scenario on the spot. For instance, if you are a rider and you have to deliver lunchbox to a particular residence, and if there are no one answering the door, you probably have to stay there longer, but the algorithm would not know the reason why you have to stay there that long. And the rating system would not give you a good rating. And the Italian regulator found that after investigation, among other violations of the data protection law, workers were not adequately informed of the logic involved in the AI system and the functioning of the automated system. And workers had no way to make an appeal either. As what we have mentioned earlier on, in April 2021, the European Commission proposed the first ever legal framework on AI, the Artificial Intelligence Act. It is probably the first law regulating specifically on AI. This has yet to be finalized. It still has to go through consultation discussion among the EU institutions and agencies. And in very brief terms, the proposed artificial intelligence seek to accord different levels of severity of technical and organizational measures to AI systems according to the risks assessed. The draft act differentiates between uses of AI that involve 4 levels of risk: unacceptable risk, high risk, limited risk, and minimal risk. And for unacceptable risk, there would be a ban. An example would be those AI systems trying to manipulate or exploit fragilities of vulnerable groups. High risk would require a host of regulatory measures like conformity assessment before putting to market. The conformity assessment is similar to, if I may draw an analogy, what you could see on a lot of existing electrical or electronic products, that they have a mark of CE mark. So you have kind to pass some kind of assessment before you could put it into the market if the AI app goes into operation. Limited risk, subject to higher transparency, disclosure requirement. Minimal risk, basically encouraging the industry to develop some code of conduct to be developed to guide the development. And we will have to see in what form and when the acts may come into being. And we have shared a few examples on the good or adverse uses of AI, and we are advocating the importance of ethical principles behind the development and use of AI. AI being a technology, it is basically neutral. And I would like to borrow a famous Chinese proverb saying that water can float a boat, so can it swallow the boat. So it all depends on how human beings make use of AI. AI itself is neutral. And I think after going through several guidelines, which I have drawn to your attention, I think we could appreciate that personal data in this digital age is ubiquitous. Any actions online would generate digital footprints. Anytime, anywhere, and any device could have your digital footprints captured, collected, analyzed, and then you got targeted or personalized services or goods. And what would be important to the individuals or to the data subjects, I think at the end of the day, transparency and explainability, necessity and proportionality will be important. Transparency is the first step to let people know, and explainability, you have to explain and justify your actions in case the data subjects raise questions or they have concerns or queries. I think, let me draw an analogy to GM label food. You tell it what it is, you put a label on, and at least people can have their own choice. Necessity and proportionality explain the justification of data collection, data use, etc., and the use will be proportionate to the benefits created or the risk. And with this, you win the trust of the customer. And at the beginning of the sharing today, I borrow a quote from the late Professor Stephen Hawking, and allow me to borrow another quote from him as well to end our sharing here. This is what he has said: when we invented fire, we messed up repeatedly, then invented the fire extinguisher. With more powerful technologies such as nuclear weapons, synthetic biology, and strong AI, we should instead plan ahead and aim to get things right the first time, because it may be the only chance we will get. Our future is a race between the growing power of our technology and the wisdom with which we use it. Let's make sure that wisdom wins. Wisdom for sure has to premise on ethics, and ethics is trust. And with wisdom and trust, we can work together and flourish. And so here, I end my sharing here, and thank you very much for your time and patience. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Tony, for a great talk. It is a difficult subject. You have managed to compress it for us in the time available with some clear insights into where we've come, where we're at, and the clear risks and where we're going, using the irrepressible Stephen Hawking to help give us the benefit of his insights. So I'd like to thank Tony for a very interesting, very informative, very thoughtful and insightful presentation today. If I can perhaps on your behalf thank him.
Thank you
for the presentation. Hope you've enjoyed the presentation through the Law Tech Center here in the Faculty of Law. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.